vulnerability, African American composers, and needed societal changes with Jessica Wiley. Stay inspired. You've been working on your dissertation called Bassoon Solos and Chamber Music, up to 7 players by African American composers. Could you share with us the inspiration for your topic?
Yeah, so dissertations are always a lot of work, and you never really understand how much work they are until once you start doing your dissertation. um, but I came to my topic by actually starting in a slightly different direction. I now find myself with a very important dissertation topic that I've become very passionate about, and another really exciting program that I'm involved in. And so I'm going to kind of talk about how I came to kind of find both of those. It all started with my husband, Anthony, and to give a little bit of background and a chance to brag about my amazing husband, Anthony is a pediatric urologist here in Salt Lake City, and he works at the Children's Hospital here. He operates on kidneys, genitalia, and bladder. Anthony is the co-director for the teaching seminar in Kampala, Uganda, with the Association for the Bladder Exstrophy Community. Abbreviated, it's ABC, but it's A-B with an E-C. So bladder exstrophy is a very rare birth defect. It affects about 10,000 to 50,000 children a year. And the reason why there's such that wide range, you'll see as we continue talking and get into it. So how bladder exstrophy happens, or bladder exstrophy happens, is in utero, the lower abdominal wall fails to develop. And therefore, the bladder is not formed correctly. And in most cases, the bladder and genitals are split in half, turned inside out, and sit outside of the body. In first world countries like the US, bladder exstrophy is diagnosed and surgery is performed. It is considered a major surgery and a challenging one at that. In third world countries, healthcare is not as developed, and so they're not able to always diagnose and really perform these advanced surgeries. So in Uganda, children with bladder exstrophy are not entirely viewed as human. It's a disgrace brought to the family, and many times these babies born with bladder exstrophy are left in various places to die. The children that are kept are sometimes kept by grandparents who go and find these babies, but the children and the whole family then are cast out of society. The kids are not allowed to be seen in public. They are not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed to even play with other children. Very heartbreaking, but some kids have even grown up under their grandparents' kitchen table because they're not allowed to be outside. They've never been outside. So once a year, Anthony donates medical supplies and a week of his time flies to Kampala, Uganda for these surgeries. And children come from all over, and it's a very big financial sacrifice for these families. It's a poor country. They don't have a lot of means. They usually live in mud huts. It's a one-room hut, and they don't have the extra money to travel. So a lot of them, if they're able to step away from their daily life, will make that sacrifice but can't pay for transportation, so they end up walking for several days on foot. My favorite thing about this program is that they actually teach these surgeons there in Kampala how to do these surgeries. So the whole hospital shuts down, and all the Kampala surgeons come and they assist and watch and learn how to perform these bladder exstrophy surgeries, since every case is slightly different. The ABC truly wants to help these children, and future children get the care that they need, and whenever they need it, not just during the 1 week of the year that my husband and his team members are there. So the first time Anthony came home, from his trip to Uganda. He came home, gave me this giant hug, and he was so serious. And he looked at me and he was like, Jessica, we need to do more for these children. He was touched by the resilience that these kids had, and felt honored to give them a second chance at life, to actually live a life. His enthusiasm and compassion really inspired me to look at my own world of expertise and wonder, what could I do with my work to change those lives around me? I look at Anthony and other surgeons and I think, oh, you have all this knowledge and all this training and all this skill to literally help heal people's bodies. But what can I really do with music? And one day the thought came to me that, you know, surgeons, they can help heal their bodies, but maybe with music, I can help heal their souls. And these children are just aching for knowledge and acceptance. They want to be a part of and connect with the community. I've spoken with some of the social workers that are there with the ABC, and they said that they did little art projects with them of like showing them how their digestive system works, you know, and they have like clay and coloring, and the kids just ate it up. Like they just wanted to do anything and everything, and being in that learning environment and with other children, they're just really craving that in their life. So I've spoken with the ABC group, the surgeons, nurses, social workers, and they're all really excited and on board with me going out and creating a music program for these children in the hospital. I think music is obviously, I mean, we all love music, and we as musicians really can see the importance of it and understand how it can really connect cultures and communities and give people a place of feeling like they matter. So I was planning on doing this and wanted this to be my dissertation topic. However, the pandemic hit several months later, and we knew the trip would be canceled or postponed. So we had a meeting recently, and usually they go down or out there in October, but things aren't still looking super great. They just had an election, and there's some bitter feelings with the election, so the country is probably not super stable right now. So we're still waiting for an opportunity to go back out there, and I'm waiting for my opportunity to give these kids a music program and give them something that can make them feel like they matter and that they can fit in. So going back to the pandemic, it was kind of compounded with the death of George Floyd. And I started then to see another opportunity to make my work as a musician, but specifically as a bassoonist, really matter. When George Floyd's life was taken by the police officer on May 25th of 2020, it really brought racial inequality to the forefront of my mind. And as we know, it sparked the largest civil rights movement in the US and worldwide. I'd first like to say, let me make clear, I am no expert on race relations. I am very new to this issue. I was raised to be colorblind, to not really notice race. But through this process and reading different books and articles, I've realized that race shouldn't be ignored, but celebrated. I started to think of ways I could fight racial hierarchy in my own little world. And my favorite thing, and the thing that stuck out to me the most, was uplifting Black excellence. This brought me to my dissertation topic. So researching, documenting, creating a list of African American composers who have written for bassoon solo and chamber music up to 7 players. I'm hopeful that during the civil rights movement, we can all open our eyes and our ears to the racial inequality that fills our textbooks, our classrooms, and recital and symphonic halls, and that we can celebrate race through these amazing compositions from people of color.
It's wonderful just hearing about your work, and too just the seed of your why, where paralleling that with your husband's work and like having this physical surgical change in people, and then how music also is paralleled with that and making change for people.
And we touched a little bit on that, in the interview that when you and I were speaking. Like during the pandemic, it was really hard for me, and I'm sure a lot of other musicians, feeling like your work is not necessary during the pandemic time, and that can be really hard to hear. But then it was kind of a good thing in a way, because it made me kind of step back and get out of like the hustle bustle of, okay, go do my undergrad, do my master's, do my doctorate, teach, perform, and kind of step back and really ask, like, why am I doing this? And am I doing this just to perform, or is there meaning behind my performance? Is there a meaning within the connections that I can make, and how am I making those connections? And I think a lot of orchestras are really struggling with this right now. I mean, orchestras and symphonies have been declining, and I mean, really, the history, we've always relied on governmental support and donors and everything. But I think we're totally missing out on an opportunity of connecting with our audience. And they always ask the question, like even in business, like, know your audience. Who's your audience? And our audience aren't just white male Europeans anymore. Our audience is very mixed. We have a lot of races, a lot of different gender, a lot of diversity. And I think in order for symphonies to survive and continue to connect with the community, we need to emulate what our community looks like.
About your research process, just with African American composers and finding music, for bassoon solo and chamber music. Could you tell us what that process has been like and what sort of things you're finding?
Yes, so in 2 words, it is slow and difficult. I was fortunate enough to find a few books at the beginning of my research to kind of help me get a jump start. So the International Dictionary of Black Composers, it's by the Center for Black Music Research, and Aaron Horn wrote a series of books, or compiled various books: woodwind music of Black composers, brass music of Black composers, string music of Black composers, etc. And they don't always overlap, so don't think you can just read the woodwind music and know that's everything that contains bassoon, because there's a few in the brass and string books that I've noticed. They have other pieces that have bassoon in them that are not in the woodwind book. So now the biggest challenge with those, though, were they're published in 1999 and between 1990 and 1996, respectively. So it's over, I mean, that's 22 to 30, 31 years ago, which is kind of old, and luckily the internet is in full swing, and I'm very grateful to have the internet, because that's really what I use. But it is still very hard to find publications. I'm lucky to find a full list of composers' works. It's somewhat easy to find names of composers, but to find a list of their works, and I don't know if that's the full list, if there's more, it's hard because there's no major list. Like, I feel like I'm kind of creating the list right now, so it's tricky to kind of be one of the first in compiling a list, because I don't want to leave anyone out, but it's hard to know, do I have everyone? Is there more out there? And even when I find a list of works from a composer, it's even more challenging to figure out if the pieces are still being published, and are they still in circulation. And in my dissertation, I'm not including any transcriptions of any pieces. I'm just including pieces that were specifically written by the composer. I just have to start somewhere, and that's where I decided to start. Same thing with African American. In that definition, I there's a lot of definitions out there, and it kind of like through my research, I realized that it can change. The definition can change on who you ask. And one article that I read that I really enjoyed basically ended with saying, you should just ask each person how they would like to be viewed. Like, would they want to be viewed as African American? Now, my research doesn't really give me the ability to do that. I can ask that to living composers and hopefully get a response from them. But I'm not able to go back in time and ask past composers. So I've created my own definition aligned with the Journal of Epidemiology and of what my term of African American actually is. So then, though, going back to finding publications can be very difficult, and part of the big reason on that is because of racism. And back in the day, and unfortunately still today, Black composers and composers of color have a hard time getting their works published. So I think it's really great now, and it's much easier now that we can go on someone's website and find their piece and purchase it from them and play it, and I'm very grateful for that. So I am only including pieces that have been published or that you're able to rent in hopes that they can be performed. The International Dictionary of Black Composers and Aaron Horn's books, they're really great, but they list a lot of works that were unpublished. And I couldn't just disregard them because you never know if they were published later. So I'm still searching and finding pieces and composers and messaging. And it's really exciting to find stuff, and it's amazing how much time it takes. And it's tricky too when you see like a piece and then the description is chamber music or chamber orchestra. And it's like, okay, well, what's the definition of chamber orchestra? So I checked out a book at my library about, what chamber orchestra is and what the definition of strings are, because I'm limiting myself to 7 players. So if it just says strings, I need to know how many strings there are. Well, that's just a wild card. It doesn't really clearly have a definition. Surely, like in certain periods, like the Baroque period of Renaissance, it had clear definitions, but nowadays it's kind of a free-for-all. So trying to track down the piece and then figuring out what the instrumentation is also really tricky. And all these pieces that I find that are not published yet or have never been published or don't fit my requirement, then I'm not just disregarding them, I am still keeping them. I view each as kind of this little treasure that I find, and I'm like, I can't let this information go. I need to hold on to this information. Yes. I won't include that in my dissertation, but I'm hoping to continue research and finding works. And I'm hoping that there can be more Black music research at Columbia College. They have quite a few manuscripts, composers' works. Wow. And I mean, they're missing, they're missing sometimes a couple movements, or they have the full thing, but it's just manuscript. No one has taken it and written it out. Wow. So there's so many opportunities to really enjoy and celebrate so much music that's out there. It's just waiting for us. Yes. And it kind of boggles my mind a little bit because, I mean, I grew up and went through all my education and thought like, okay, this is the music, and sure, maybe we'll find an extra little piece here or there, but it was never really brought to my attention of all the works that have been kind of pushed to the side because of racial differences. So I'm hoping too that anyone out there, if you know of, or if you are an African American composer or know of any works, that you could message me and give me any information at all. Every composer that I message, and I'm asking like a specific question about their piece or whatever, I am always so thankful when they answer, but I also like end every email with, if you have any other information at all of any other composers or works, like anything is greatly appreciated. Because that is kind of the scariest thing about this is how do I make sure I have found everyone? And I think how I get there is kind of just when my circles, when I start making circles, when people start saying, oh well, Hail Stork or Still or K, and I'm like, okay, I've got them, I've got them, I've got them. But it is kind of intimidating. So hopefully I can find everyone I need to.
What would you like to do with your findings?
I feel very fortunate to find something that I feel like is really needed, especially at this time in this world, and something that I'm very passionate about. And the more research I do, the more pieces I find, the more connections I make, the more composers I talk to, I feel more and more of an importance of, this matters, this work matters. And it's exciting because, my schooling is coming to an end, and it's always scary as a student to step away from school and say, okay, now what do I do with my life? And sorry, my dog is distracting me. Argo, go. Some love
Making an appearance.
Yes, he's a hot mess right now. But it's really exciting to find something that has so many possibilities. Like you said, like there's so many manuscripts that need to be written out and published, and there's, you can expand the topic and to more than 7 players, symphonic works and ballets and operas. There's some really cool ones. And recording projects and other instruments, other different races. I mean, it's just crazy. There's so much that needs to be done. And it's interesting because the second author I talked about, Aaron Horn, he actually wrote a dissertation. I'm trying to remember what school he went to. I don't remember. I think his dissertation was published in 1973 or 76. And his dissertation was over clarinet music in regards to African American composers. And that did not catch on. The only other instruments that I could find dissertation or some kind of list were flute, trumpet, and saxophone. Some piano, but again, a lot of dissertations that talk about African American composers, they limit it to 3 or 4 compositions or 3 or 4 composers, and they discuss in detail that piece and talk about why it's important, which is great work, very, very important work, and that needs to happen. But it also kind of shows and opens up this large hole that we have in our history and textbooks and recital halls and symphonic halls, and that's where it's kind of limitless. I mean, there's so much that can be done, and I'm hoping other people can feel kind of this call and see the importance with this work and step in and start doing some of it as well, because I do think it's really, really important. And I know if some of these pieces could just be heard, at least once, they would see how cool some of these pieces really are and how important they are and why they should be incorporated into our standard repertoire. So yeah, I am kind of hoping to maybe do a little bit of all of the above. And with music, you always want to keep all opportunities open. And it's really nice to see that in this area of research, there are so many opportunities. So there's definitely space for me there, and I could feel like I'm making a difference and helping shed light on to the many composers that are out there who need another voice in their corner.
Could you talk a little bit about your organizational process?
What I did, so the first thing I did was I got these textbooks, and I was very grateful that they were at my library, and I didn't have to order them and wait. But I literally went through and read every single line and looked for bassoon or wind quintet. And it was tricky if they just said opera, because how big is the opera? for chamber orchestra. So there was a lot of question marks. I did it alphabetically by last name of composer, and so I have kind of this my main spreadsheet because I have multiple spreadsheets and multiple lists.
Wow.
And anytime I run across someone else's name, I jot it down on a list. So, like, I have a spreadsheet called composers to check out. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they have any works with bassoon, and I'm starting to sift through that. But I will list, so on my main spreadsheet, I have composers, and then I have, I keep track of their years, their birth and death dates, their heritage, so it fits my African American definition, which can be tricky. And then, let me think, then the list of the composition, the year it was composed, any notes on the piece, number of instruments. And when I first started, I just thought, oh, and 7 instruments. I didn't have it as 7 players. I started it as 7 instruments. And I quickly realized what a mistake that was. Because in a quintet, you think, okay, 5 people. But what if flute doubles on pick? Then that's technically 6 instruments, not 5 people, or, So I was like, okay, I'll just make it 7 players. So that way, if there's doubling, and then percussion, that was a really tricky thing, because percussion, they'll list all these percussive instruments, but I don't know how many that is. So then I have to find the piece, look through it, sometimes purchase it to be able to look through it and know how many percussionists are they requiring. Is it just 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? And then does that fit into my category? And then I do try to keep track, I do keep track of recordings if I know that there's anything that's been recorded. Very few things have been recorded. Very, very few, like handful, maybe 2 handfuls, which is pretty sad. Then I have it color coded, and I highlight. Pink is my favorite color, so I highlight in pink the pieces that I have found and confirmed that, yes, the composer fits my requirements, so I highlight them in pink. And then I highlight the individual pieces that I've found. I know the publisher, they're still available for purchase or rental, and so on. So, and then when I find something that doesn't fit my requirements, I cannot delete it. I'm too afraid to delete anything. So I just cut and move it over to another spreadsheet. And I color code it, like red is no longer in circulation. Yellow is still on my main spreadsheet as pending. Green, well, I guess I don't have to tell you all my color coding.
I love hearing it. Fascinating.
So I'm slowly working through this list, but then I have lists on lists because I also went through the Journal of Black Music, I believe it's called, and they have every issue up to 2016 electronically online. And so I've gone through every article in their issues and have searched for bassoon, abbreviated bassoon, bassoon even misspelt, because I found a couple pieces like that, and then I thought, oh my God, have I missed anything then? Because someone spelt it with only 1 O. Which makes me worried, because that's, control find is great, but sometimes not so great. And so I go through that journal, and I found several names, a couple pieces, which is great, but sometimes it's just names. And then I will also, when I find, a really great source like that, I also look to see who their sources are, and what articles or publications they have used. So it's a lot of work, and I'm just hopeful that I'm doing everything right. I also actually keep a spreadsheet of all my communications, like what day I send the email or message, if it's through their website or my email, who I'm asking about, because sometimes the composer is not living any longer, but I find them on someone's website, and so I can ask that way, and then what message is sent on what day, and then what the follow-up is, and that can be great. I've actually had a pretty successful response rate with my living composers, which has been really, really great. And but there are some who just I don't know why they don't answer. I mean, life gets busy. I get it, and maybe they're not always checking their websites, which I understand. But then it is frustrating because I'm like, I know you have these pieces. I need to know where they are.
Yes.
So I'm like stalking them on Facebook. I find them on Facebook and send them a message on Facebook. And then I find out if they're friends of composers I've already contacted, and then I contact those composers that I've already got a response of, and like, hey, do you know so and so? And
Yeah, getting
so
connection.
I'm just a creeper, stalking all these people. Oh geez, trying to find their words.
The name of music, yeah.
The name of music and bassoon, and all that's holy. Yeah. So it's interesting, and then I do keep a list of how I search and what I search and on what day I search.
Great.
I'm very fortunate to have someone on my committee, Dr. Rawlings. He has been really helpful in how to write, but really in how to research. I mean, I've written research papers and everything, but I've never gone out this far on my own into a topic that I can't pull lots of other dissertations and published works and everything. So this is kind of new territory for me. And when I go to defend my dissertation, he made it very clear that I need to be able to defend every little step of my research. So every name I type into Google, I put in my search spreadsheet, and that it takes a lot of time. I'm like, it's very frustrating sometimes because it's annoying to document every little thing. But it also helps me and will help future researchers.
Yes.
Whether they can find any holes in my research and find more pieces, which would be great. I'm hoping there's no holes in my research. I'm trying very hard to make sure of that. But I am human, I am imperfect. So, but I'm doing my very best, and hopefully I can find a lot of pieces. And I mean, the biggest hope is, the reason why I'm doing all of this is so these pieces can be performed, so they can be known. And that's the most important. And so when I'm frustrated of having to document what I typed into Google search engine, I just remember this is for the greater good.
Backup.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Everything is backed up. Every time I work, I have my hard drive here. I have an external hard drive. Everything's on here. I use Excel spreadsheets, but also Google spreadsheets. So like through my Google Drive, so it's backed up to the cloud. But just in case the cloud crashes, I have 2 copies. So that is one of my greatest fears. All this time and work, and I mean, because I've spent 30 minutes trying to find one piece, and then finding out like it's one too many players. So
I had 20 years research backed up on 2 large drives. Lost it.
Right.
So we're spending time reconstructing everything. Yeah, you don't want it to happen.
Yes. No. Yeah, no, that's a great point. My father-in-law gave me the same advice. He's like, Jessica, make sure everything is backed up all the time. So yes, because that would be insanely devastating.
Richard, can I ask, how did you lose all of your work?
Early work is all. It's hard to get large drives to save all these video interviews, and sometimes the drive just fails. So I have double, triple drive, and then for one reason or another, for some stupid reason, I had the 2 big drives in my car. They had an accident, and the only thing that was damaged were those drives.
Oh.
The only thing is damaged.
Oh man.
I back up twice, 3 times, 4 times now.
Yeah. You know what? I think I'll go out and get another.
I have also on videotapes. So now it's a matter of going back and reloading videotapes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing about that. Yeah, it's good to just be more aware of that.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna get another external hard drive, keep this one down here on my desk, and put the other one, I don't know, upstairs in my nightstand or something.
Yes, and like
Somewhere
never move it. It's like it stays there.
Don't touch them.
Yeah. Jessica, could you share what changes need to happen in the music community and the world that you've learned?
Very big question, Julie. I don't know if I can answer
in the
that.
world. Okay.
Or no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I can answer that.
Okay.
So I think the biggest change that needs to happen in the music community and the world is to be kind. Black Lives Matter movement isn't political. It's not to put anyone down or make anyone feel less about themselves. It's all about kindness and recognizing that we are all equal. We all deserve compassion, empathy, respect. And we have a lot of side effects in our society left over from racism and slavery. And I think many of us, including myself, are unaware of. And through my higher education, I mean, I learned about Beethoven, Vivaldi, Haydn, Mozart, Mahler, Weber. I mean, all the big names, which was great and very much needed. But there's a really important opportunity for growth. And I'm not talking about a revolution, but an evolution. I think it's time to shift into a more inclusive community. And it needs to involve more than just offering a class on African American composers, or having a discussion on a dissertation of bassoon solo and chamber music of African American composers. It's so much more than that, and it's so much greater than that. Our higher education needs to step out of the 19th century and into the 21st century by incorporating diversity into our curriculum. Private lessons teachers, we can require one piece on every recital of our students and ourselves to include a person of color. Ensemble conductors, history and theory professors, they can incorporate composers of color as well. And what we learn in college is important and also shows us what is important to learn and therefore to teach. It shows us what matters. If we aren't learning of composers of color, we are not learning that they are important and that they matter. I mean, I had the thought when I was doing my research, when I was finding all these pieces and all these names, I tried to imagine what music would look like if we never learned about composers from Germany. I mean, just think of one major country that has been critical in our history as musicians, and try to ignore that country and those composers. And think of all the amazing compositions we would have missed out on. And that kind of is my biggest reason and point of there needs to be more research. I mean, there's so much more that needs to be done. And these are things of how and why our music community needs to evolve.
Could you tell us why being vulnerable is important in music and life?
Yes, so, I mean, music requires us to be vulnerable, as does kindness. And vulnerability allows us to show who we really are, all our weaknesses, all our strengths, our imperfections. And it also allows us to accept others for who they are. And I do feel very vulnerable doing this research. I am not a racial expert. I don't know what it's like to be a target of racial injustice. I don't know what it's like to have my race negatively affect aspects of my daily life. I can't speak to what any of that feels like. I can relate on a very small, different scale with sexism and what I've dealt with through my life and career, but it's not the same. I think part of the problem is many of us don't know where to start. We don't know what composers of color are out there. We don't know what music they have written. But I believe vulnerability on everyone's end is the pathway into acceptance and inclusion and into having classical music be for everyone again. I mean, classical music is kind of viewed as this stuffy thing, you know, to people outside of our community, in our little world. But if we can be vulnerable and connect through other cultures with what's important in their culture and show them that they matter to us, I think that's what it's all about. It comes back down to kindness.
Could you share with us something that you wish you knew when you started your career in music?
I think I'm grateful for how limited of scope I had when I began, because it's given me a lot of insight now with my research and why this matters so much. Especially when I decided on this topic and I literally couldn't name one name that fit my topic. You know, I realized like, oh, there's something missing here. And I am pretty brave in being vulnerable and open about who I am. And I think that's important in a lot of areas, especially research, because you have to be able to admit mistakes or in order to really put yourself out there and find what really needs to be found. And it's also about, you know, I was really worried about stepping into this role and being portrayed as having a God complex. Like, oh, I'm higher privilege, I'm white, and I'm going to help these people, and I'm going to be the reason why, you know, their pieces are known or anything. I have a good friend who actually is getting her master's in minority and race relations right now, and she has been great to talk to, because I also was very uncomfortable talking about race. I never had conversations about race or racial inequality or hierarchy, so it was very hard for me to even approach the subject. But I spoke with her because a little part of me felt like, well, I'm not African American, I'm not Black, like I don't think I have the right or the place to, you know, step in and do this work, which is completely wrong thinking. I don't really understand why I thought that. Maybe it was just being afraid of being vulnerable. But especially as a white person in the majority of the US, it comes down to us and us needing to make that change. I mean, if the minority can't make the majority change, the majority needs to see and recognize and understand that there needs to be change and help facilitate that change. It's not just up to African American composers and composers of color to get their own works out there and still deal with racial injustice and having their works published and so on. So I think it's important that each of us kind of take a step up, put aside our worries, our fears, and open ourselves to being vulnerable, and being okay with making mistakes. Because I know I will make mistakes. I know I may say something that may maybe not be correct or politically correct, but I'm definitely willing to learn and to grow and to better myself and those around me. So I know that's a really long answer, but I think I can now appreciate how naive I was as a student, but also seeing like the growth that is capable or possible, and knowing that there's still so much more growth that can be achieved.
Are there any bassoon compositions from your research that you can
So many!
name to us? That would be amazing.
Just wait until you get the dissertation.
Yeah.
So there's so many, and it's hard because when I do this list, I'm just listing titles and duration and when they were written and notes on the pieces. And sometimes I can find recordings, most often not. But I'm always like, what does this piece sound like?
Yes.
Like, and I've already spent so much money buying music. And but I will talk about 5 pieces that I've performed.
Okay.
Because I don't think I could talk about anything I haven't personally played yet.
Mm-hmm.
But more to come on that. But some compositions that I would recommend would be there's Gary Nash. He is still living. He wrote Mot Fut Salsa, which is Vietnamese for 1 minute, and it's a 1 minute piece. These are all unaccompanied works as well, because I had to play everything unaccompanied for my lecture recital because of the pandemic. So there's some other fabulous pieces out there that I really want to get my hands on and play, but they're with piano or chamber groups. And now that things are starting to open up, I'm really excited to dive into those pieces. But another work is actually becoming quite popular now, which is really cool. Adolphus Hale Stork, his bassoon set, he wrote that in 1996. That's a really fun, cute piece. There's Ed Bland. He has a really cool story. He unfortunately has passed away with his wife, Mary, and she's been super sweet and open with so much information and like with publication and stories about his compositions and everything. And it's really cool because in the hip hop world, Ed Bland is very well known. Like hip hoppers refer to Bland as the great grandfather of hip hop. Which is really cool that he then wrote this bassoon piece. I mean, that makes us sound a little cooler as bassoonists. And it's this really, really fun piece. It's called For Bassoon, so it's not like a super original title, but it was written in 1979, and that's one of my favorites. I love all these pieces, but that is one of my favorites. J. Kimmo Williams is another composer. He wrote Quiet Shadows, and that was written in 1978. And Quiet Shadows is a really cool piece because so Quiet Shadows was written about his experience serving in Vietnam. And as the performer, you represent a soldier standing on guard throughout the night, watching kind of over your people, the audience. And you have to stand, a certain way on stage when you perform. And it has all the notes written out, but there are no bar lines, there are no dynamics, no tempo markings. So it's all up to you as a performer, which made me just kind of think of, because I read up about, some of his experiences in Vietnam and how he would be on guard duty and, he would see a tree and know like, okay, when evening comes, that tree will fool me. I will think it's, something different because it's a weird shape. And sure enough, all the sounds, all the images, all the shadows, everything comes to life. And, he's very worried about these people he's having to look after. And so playing it is kind of interesting because it kind of puts you in his shoes and trying to figure out what all these shapes of, like, what these shapes are of these notes. Are they just shadows? Are they the enemy? And it gives you this really great freedom as a performer to put your own voice in, but also to step into someone else's shoes. The final piece I'll mention is by Kevin Stott, and he's been great. I mean, he listened to my lecture recital, and his wife even emailed me and was like, "You did a fabulous job," and it was just so cute. So they have been absolutely great, and he wrote this really cool piece. It's called Three Short Pieces for Bassoon. It was written in 2014 to 2015, and then he made revisions on it this year, and I performed it at my lecture recital. and it's really jazzy. And the second movement is very still and kind of haunting, but really beautiful at the same time. And I wrote to him and I was like, Kevin, I think I'm going to play this one without any vibrato. I think it's just like begging for that. And he loved that idea. And I was able to play that piece, and it was really fun. And, bassoon doesn't really get a whole lot of jazz influences. So when you are studying African American composers, I mean, that's a big part of their history. And so you have these really cool different rhythms that you get to play around with as a bassoonist.
Is there a course from university that you wish had been offered?
Yes, so my answer kind of goes back to a little bit before of some of the things I mentioned. In regards to this topic, I don't think there's one class that should have been offered. I think I would love to see in the future every single class incorporate composers of color, to then again show that it is important that we learn them, it is important that we play their works, it is important that we teach them, or teach about them. So my answer is probably untraditional, but I think I would really like to see every course in university kind of be tweaked a little bit, to be a little more open to diversity.
Could you tell us a little bit about your bassoon?
Yeah, so I play on a Fox 601. I paired it with a Lightzinger FM1 Platinum vocal. I tried lots of other vocals, and I just couldn't find one that fit my instrument, which is kind of weird because usually Fox 601 you can pair it with a great Heckle vocal and sound great, but not mine. I don't know why, but I love my bassoon. It has a really dark sound, and I don't know if that's me or my bassoon, but a lot of people think I play on a Heckle because of my sound, which I'm very flattered by. My husband asked me if I would ever want a new bassoon, and I don't know if I would answer yes to that or not. I think it would take a lot. I've grown attached to my bassoon, though if they would play the tenor Ds in tune every time and not be flat, that is one thing I would quickly give up.
There's one thing.
Those tenor Ds, man. Yeah. So I always been playing my octave work and everything on those to get them just right. So yeah, that's one thing I don't like about my bassoon. Yeah, but I do really love it. I am wanting to get an extension for my forward F sharp because I always thought I had really short pinkies, but it's actually just the curve of my hand is really significant. So my pinky is a good height, just not in relation to my other pinky or my other fingers. So my forward F sharp is like I have to throw my whole arm into it. So I want to get a little extension on that. But I'm very happy with my setup and with my bassoon, and it would take quite a bit for me to want to change.
Thank you so much for your time.